Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to another episode of DINCast, where this time we're going to be focusing on leadership, not management, with a very wonderful John Steele, Chair of the English Institute of Sport and Performance Director at Loughborough University, and many other things besides, but I'll let him introduce himself shortly. What we wanted to try and do in this session is look a little bit about how you can navigate through the current crisis to get a bit of clarity, and how we're going to sort of look at that new way of working for what comes next. So looking forward to a really interesting discussion. But John, could you just sort of introduce yourself to the viewers, please?
Yeah, hello everybody. John Steele, my background in the military, trained at Sandhurst, number of years service, then also worked in the property world. So corporate world based around a number of different property areas. I then became a professional rugby player, moved on to be a coach when I was getting too old as a player. And I've had various leadership roles in sport, chief executive roles at UK Sport, at the Rugby Football Union, Youth Sport Trust, and now Director of Sport at Loughborough, Chair of the English Institute of Sport, and also run leadership consultancy Unforgiving Minute.
So on that, John, clearly in all of those sort of very senior roles that you've held, you've not shied away from sort of taking on some of the tough challenges. So you've gone into some organisations who were probably quite frankly in a state of crisis themselves. So what have you learned from your experience that you think is relevant to the current situation we're in?
I think probably one of the big learns from, and most organisations go through turbulent times, good times. It's you get a roller coaster of different experiences. But I suppose a bit of patience. I'm naturally quite a driven person, so I like to see solutions. I'm a great pragmatist. I like to get to a result. But I think you have to be patient, and you have to really think about how you can create solutions to issues with the least possible damage, rather than just trying to get things done as quickly as possible. And I think that probably applies now in terms of the corona coaster as opposed to the roller coaster, which we're all on at the moment. We're all having to think of how we deal with a crisis. It is a global crisis, a national crisis, and it's a crisis for individual organisations and people. So actually we're having to look at what do we do now to stem the flow of problems. But at the same time, we have to be thinking long term. Just firefighting isn't good enough. And I think that mixture of the moment operational management and long-term strategic leadership, getting that balance is tricky, but really important.
And so how do you think your sort of, career in the military has sort of helped you sort of prepare for these sort of situations? Has it helped you?
I think, I was in the military long enough ago for me not to face some of the incredible challenges that have been faced in recent years by some of my colleagues that remained in the military. But I think one great saying that the military has is no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So however much you plan, stuff changes. As soon as you go in with this great plan, something you didn't expect happens and knocks you a bit. And of course, what that means is you've got to be adaptable and you've got to be flexible. A plan, a strategy, whatever it might be, a framework is only there as a tool. It then needs leadership judgment to then apply what you're seeing in front of yourself, situational leadership, how the situation dictates what you do, not what you planned X number of months or X number of days before. And I guess that's the big lesson, the ability to be adaptable even when a plan has to be thrown out the window and you need to think on your feet in any situation.
So you were heavily involved in a number of Olympics, certainly the London 2012 one in the UK. Now, obviously, we didn't see any crisis sort of going on there, but were there any parallels in terms of how you planned for that and for the different scenarios that actually, again, would be helpful in the current situation?
Well, London 2012 was a result, and it was a very successful home games. It was a result of a number of stakeholders working together. And we were fortunate in that the system, sport, the Olympic, Paralympic system matured at the right time. If people are too territorial, if it's all about them and their organisation and we all have to get the credit, you reach a point where you hit a glass ceiling in terms of achievement. Really high performing situations, events, scenarios come from really good collaboration between partners. And you have to throw out the or you have to believe in look, it doesn't matter who gets the credit, let's all make this happen. And all those different organisations, from British Olympic Association, British Paralympic Association, LOCOG, the organising committee, UK Sport, English Institute of Sport, all these organisations came together with all the national governing bodies of sport and created something very special. But without the collaboration, that never would have happened.
So, as I say, you've worked in lots of different sectors, at very, very sort of senior level. Is there one particular, piece that you're most proud of in terms of sort of your achievements as a leader?
Wow, I suppose you mature and you change as a leader and as a person as you get older. And my attitude and my approach has changed, probably slightly more easygoing, slightly more flexible. And there are milestones I've had that I've been proud of in my coaching days. We won the European Cup when I was at Northampton Saints. Very proud of that as a milestone achievement. Various Olympic, Paralympic achievements that I've been part of. But in the end, I think probably as I get older, it's the way you go about things that make you proud. And when you support and influence people and see them succeed, you get a really warm feeling. And someone says, you know what, if you hadn't helped me with that, I might not have been able to do that. And that's where I really now measure my success. How can I impact on others? How can I get satisfaction from supporting and enabling others? Maybe more than the big set piece achievements, which we recognise more easily.
And it's quite often said that actually you learn more from your failures and defeats than you necessarily do from success. So what was your sort of toughest moment or toughest time, and what were the sort of takeaways from that?
Yeah, I would agree with that, actually. I never really, when I was a player and a coach in professional rugby, when we won, I tended to be relieved. When we lost, it was pain. And, whether that's right or wrong, it's a sort of physical reaction you can't do a lot about. So sometimes performance is driven by fear of losing more than joy of winning. And you'll see that, I think, in a lot of people I've met. Sounds a bit negative, but I think that is the case. But also, I think, the joy of working with others. I think the satisfaction in working in a team is really the biggest thing. When you can all sit shoulder to shoulder, whether it's in a changing room or whether it's in an office, and say we've achieved that together. There's a real thrill in that collective success. I think in terms of failure, well, I've had a number of those, that's for sure as well, whether it be in sport or in other roles. I've had roles where I've clashed. I had a chief executive role with the Rugby Football Union, which finished early due to a clash with my chairman, who was directly my line manager. Big clash of values, way of doing things, and of course, you're tested during those times. What are you prepared to put up with? How much will you stretch your own values? So you have to take the rough with the smooth. But I guess, we talk a lot about resilience. You find out about resilience during the failures, and you find out about resilience during the sort of period we're in now with COVID.
And so during those tough times then, John, how did you can't lead if you're not fit and well. So how did you look after yourself? How did you get yourself through those tough times?
Yeah, I learned quite quickly in the army, actually, as a young officer, when my sergeant major said to me once, I wanted to do everything the people I was leading were doing, all the soldiers. Whatever they were doing, I wanted to do. If they were getting less sleep, I wanted to match it, to show that I was with them. But he said to me on a couple of times, look, if you don't keep yourself fit and healthy and in the right frame of mind, you can't look after us. You can't make the right decisions at the right time. So I'm not for a moment saying you give yourself special privileges, but you have a duty of care to those you lead to stay in a healthy state to be able to lead, whether that's emotionally, mentally, and physically. You've got to look after yourself, because then you're at optimal operational fitness to lead, make good decisions, and look after those you're in charge of.
And I suppose that leads us on to sort of some of the situations that we're in now in terms of this whole leadership versus management. Are you sort of seeing good leaders emerge, that you've personally sort of seen? And, how do you view this whole leadership versus management in a crisis?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we all flex, we're all managers, we're all leaders. Understanding the difference is really important. And management is the nuts and bolts, the processes, the systems, the framework we need to run our organization. Leadership is the spirit of that, what you hang on that framework. Probably more about motivation, inspiration, creating discretionary performance from those that you lead, not just the performance expected of them in terms of a JD and management. So I think that balance is really important. I think what we're seeing at the moment is a lot of management bias, which is quite right. We have to work out how our organizations, how systems, processes can help our organizations stabilize, exist, and eventually prosper again on the far side of COVID. But I think if we're not careful, we concentrate too much on management and we ignore the leadership side, which is just as necessary in lockdown, potentially more necessary where people may feel isolated, alone, and so on. And just organising, we're all experimenting, aren't we? Because it's unprecedented territory, but just organising the odd, set piece, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Skype, FaceTime, all those things that never seem to quite work on my computer. But just organising those isn't enough. I think when we're in an office environment or a workplace, we walk the floor, we get around, we talk to people, we're visible leaders, and that has an impact on morale. And we need to kind of walk online. We need to walk the net in a way and say to people and have casual check-ins with people, not just operational meetings. It's the equivalent of the water cooler moment, the cup of coffee in the office, where you may not have planned it. You have some really useful discussions and people enjoy seeing each other. Those have gone now. So how do we create that social interaction which isn't necessarily formal?
And have you got sort of any examples of what you're doing within English Institute of Sport or at Loughborough about how you're keeping in touch with your colleagues and team?
Well, we've got that. We've got a gradient, really, of interactions. And especially at Loughborough, those run from the absolutely formal agenda meetings right through to texting, one-to-ones in terms of Zoom or whatever we might use. All of those, that gradient of different interaction, and also not overdoing it. I mean, we found that just crowbarring what would have been live face-to-face meetings and just saying we'll replace those online. It's different online. We all know that. You've got about half if you're going to do an 8-hour day of meetings, you've probably got 4 hours online before you feel frazzled. It's not easy. So I think adapting is really important. And I think also the lessons we're all learning is, can we cut away some dead wood here? Is there stuff we do that doesn't really impact? And can we actually be saying, right, we're going to weave in exercise, we're going to weave in social, we're going to have more relaxation, we might have some online yoga, meditation, whatever it might be. And I think that's pretty healthy because on the far side of this, it is going to be different. So actually how we weave work and emotional and physical well-being into a day, this is a great experiment for that.
Absolutely. And I suppose aside from sort of getting your team to do a Joe Wicks workout or something like that, do you find that sort of there is still room for humour in this very uncertain time?
I think there has to be. There is a human tragic story around COVID. We see it every day in the news. Many of us experience it with people we know, possibly family members. There is a massive human tragedy story. Having said that, it is all of our duty to be positive. And I think being positive in the moment, which humour can be part of in an appropriate way, but also where's the promised land? What is there to look forward to? If this just sprawls in front of us as a collection of barriers, how are people going to feel? Actually, there's got to be something on the far side. There's going to be a time of opportunity. Despite the tragedy, there is going to be a time of opportunity where the phoenix will rise from the ashes, all those great cliches. This burning platform of COVID will force us to be different as a society and as businesses and organisations on the far side. So are we thinking about that? And are we communicating that to our people? Look, it's hard, but there are good times to come. So battle it out. It's going to be worth it.
So sort of through your Unforgiving Minute work, you work with a lot of leaders. I know you do a lot of coaching with organisations and that. Has this sort of, this crisis changed any of your assumptions or beliefs about the way that we set up and run organisations?
I think, and this is getting up in the helicopter a bit, I think we probably, as a nation, become too regulatory, too much governance, too much regulation, too much process, too much checking in on whether everyone's getting things right, even to the point where it's lowest common denominator time. One person or one organization does something wrong. We need new rules to prevent anyone from ever doing that again, rather than balancing the likelihood. So I suppose my hope, and by the way, I'm not for a moment suggesting we break regulations. They're there to be followed just as laws and everything else are. But maybe as a nation, we can become more innovative, more flexible. And you've done a lot of work, Ian, around disruption. Well, we've just had the mother of all, or in the middle of the mother of all disruptions, aren't we? A burning platform with flames higher than any other burning platform that we've seen in many, many years. So COVID is saying to us, time to change. And it is giving us an urgency and a hurry up call to say, do things differently here. And I think there's the opportunity to do that.
So I know that from your time in the military and sport, you would quite often be called upon to rebuild or to reboot. And I know, as I say, some of your experiences with Team GB were about that longer term plan and vision about sort of, winning more medals. So I just wondered if you were sort of going about rebooting a business or rebooting part of a culture within an organization in the current climate, what would your approach be?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, phase one, stabilize as much as possible. So we're in a crisis at the moment. There's no point in crystal ball gazing into the future until you're stable. But at an appropriate time, once you've stabilized, mitigated the risks that have thrown themselves at us, there's a quiet look to the future. Actually, what might it look like? What are the demands on the far side? What might an innovative organization that looks for opportunities, what might they be doing? So I think there is a matter of sort of painting what this will look like with what we know. Once you've done that, then you work back from that. So if that's how it's going to be, what's the difference between the way we work now and the way we need to work in the future? I think the organizations that will fail are the ones that say, this is the way we've always done stuff. We need to get through this crisis and then we can get back to business as usual, how we've always done it. But how we've always done it will be history. It won't be relevant to the future. There will be a post-COVID society, globally and nationally, that is different. People's attitudes will have changed. The economy will have changed. Lots of things will have changed. So we need to paint that picture and then work out the steps between the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things, and then you map them out. And that normally means getting people together in the organization in a so we don't alarm people in a non-alarmist way, but getting people to think about the future, and that can have a positive effect as well.
And so, as I say, you've worked at the higher echelons of sport and I just wondered, and business, and I just wondered what you see were the lessons for businesses that can take from sort of the world of high performance sport, because when we've sort of talked before, you've used the analogy that actually, in sport you fail, but you learn from it in a different way than what you would in business. So were there any things you'd like to sort of share from the world of sport around that could be taken back into business organizations?
I suppose sport is it's not good at everything. There's plenty of things that sport can't do and learns from business. But actually, one thing it does well is it fails well. And if that doesn't sound a contradiction, that when it fails, it doesn't want to, but when it does, it absolutely relishes the opportunity to identify the learns from failing, rather than covering up and saying it's a bit embarrassing, it's painful, let's move on. We'll talk about the next win. Because as you said earlier, and you don't learn as much from winning, something has worked, which you already knew. But when you fail, there might be new things that could be done to promote performance in the future. So I think that's definitely one thing. I think what sport is very people-centric as well, whether that be, an athlete-centered or any people within sport. People are what drive sport: volunteers, coaches, support staff, all the performance support you'd expect to wrap around an athlete, All of these people are what makes sport tick. There's no spectacle, there's no entertainment, there's no shiny trophies unless people are looked after in the right way. And maybe that's the lesson for our society, where less competition, more caring. And it's a lesson for sport as well. Are medals everything? Of course they're not. They never have been. But maybe we need to put more emphasis on caring about the people who are involved in sport and the people who enjoy sport.
And so finally then, sort of drawing upon all of your experiences and career, is there one sort of final piece of advice or thought or guidance that you would want to sort of share with viewers to take away with them?
We'll all come through this in change, as changed people and as changed society, and we'll look back and say, well, what did that organisation do for me, or how did that person cope under the pressure? So we need to look after each other. Forget about hierarchy, forget about organograms. We look after each other. There'll be a set of loyalties and closeness on the far side of this challenge. We look back and say, you know what? I'll work with that person in the future. When I needed them in extraordinary circumstances, they were there offering support, offering help.
John Steele, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ian.